Good morning, all of you. Welcome back to the channel. So let's start with 9th of June's important topic from the newspapers. So firstly, yesterday also, as I mentioned you guys, that yesterday was the MPC meeting. So RBI, it holds the rates basically, maintains the status quo and vows to keep the price stability. So as always, the target is on controlling down the inflation, bringing it more closer towards a target level of 4%. So repo rate remains unchanged at 6.5%. And the forecast for the real GDP growth for the current financial year is at 6.5%. And it projects that CPI inflation would be averaging around 5.1% this fiscal year. So apart from all this, you need to know about clearly the distinction between real GDP and nominal GDP. What is the method of their calculation? How is it different? And coming to what RBI governor has to say, so he said that we have made good progress in containing down inflation despite 3 years of global turmoil. So you need to know about what are the global challenges that we have faced, that we've gone through, and India's growth has bounced back. So this is definitely showing India's strength, the economic strength, performance of our Indian economy, resilience of our Indian economy. So that is posing a really positive picture, a strong picture as far as Indian economy is concerned and dealing with the global challenges, global turmoil. And when we talk about rupees 2000 notes withdrawal from circulation, so the update is that half of rupees 2000 notes, they have come back to the banks. So you need to know more about what are different types of inflation, headline inflation, how is it different from the core inflation, which one is much more important for us when we talk about the real life for the common man. So that's all the important nitty-gritties as far as inflation, MPC, RBI, all of that is concerned. So Canada is giving space to extremists. So this is in a way linked to, we can say, Khalistanis. So External Affairs Minister, he sharply rebuked Canada on Friday, lambasting its government for giving space to extremists, separatists, and those who advocate violence. So his remarks, they came after a float celebrating Indira Gandhi's assassination by her Sikh bodyguards was taken out as a part of a parade in the Canadian city of Brampton. So talking about monsoon sets in over Kerala after 7 days of delay. So as far as monsoon is concerned, it's extremely important topic from geography. So southwest monsoon, we are talking about southwest monsoon onsetting, and it has advanced into the entire Lakshadweep area, most parts of Kerala, most parts of the South Tamil Nadu, and some more parts of southwest, central, and northeast Bay of Bengal. Moving forward. Coming to the editorial page, so this article is talking about railway safety, getting it back on track after Odisha. So what are the possible causes behind this incident, the accident which happened? This is not so important for us. We need to go into exact causes. We need to know more about that. So for that, investigation is going on. So we need to work upon strengthening the access to systems. So stronger safeguards against such misadventures, whether it is by the custodian himself or otherwise, may be difficult to build, but it is something that must be pursued with great resolve. So provision of a double lock system, even for the remote huts in the railway stations, will certainly cause great inconvenience to implement, increasing the chances of train delays. But is it a great price to pay given the Odisha train accident. So likewise, like we talk about that this is an age of mobile phones and IT applications, and it should be possible to think of a system of multiple digital authorizations to access such equipment without the physical movement of staff other than the maintainers. So there's another issue, that is the larger question of Indian Railway safety record and the way forward for it. So let us look at the accident data. So till a decade ago, fatalities caused by the railway accidents used to be in the range of 500 plus people every year. But in the last 4 years or so, the number is now less than 50. Although the Odisha accident, it has left its imprint on safety statistics, no doubt, but it is important to accept that the general reduction in the accident rate is a result of some positive actions like elimination of unmanned level crossings as well as improved track renewal and maintenance exercises. So on an average or broadly, when we have or try to understand the number of railway accidents, so the number has come down. And then funds, that is not an issue. So therein lies a lesson that it was William Shakespeare who said, strong reasons make strong actions. So yes, the rail network in India is largely saturated. The number of train services that has gone up exponentially, and there is a need to fill all vacancies in the safety categories. So all this makes it even more imperative to focus more on upgradation of track and signaling system that we have. So we have talked in detail about Kavach. So this is the indigenous comprehensive signaling system. It could not have prevented this accident as well. But other aspects of safety do demand faster implementation of Kavach. This would not only enhance the rail safety, but also improve the sectional capacity to run more trains. So we have talked about this, that how the Kavach system would be implemented across India. There's a proper chronology of things as per the importance of different railway routes. So bridging the growing trust deficit in the state of Manipur, we are very well aware about the current situation, the state of Manipur. So things, I would say, are still not under control because we see that time and again the violence, we get the news of violence getting re-erupted over there. So we need to see how things would they would be brought under control. CRPFs have been deployed in the state. So any changes introduced in Manipur should be a natural evolution from the past, keeping in mind the sensitivities of the state's communities. So that is very important. We have seen instances of ethnic violence which is going on, and it's important to restore peace, then undo the damage that is being caused. Economic emphasis as far as India and Nepal is concerned. So the focus was on trade development ties during the Nepal's Prime Minister's visit. So we are focusing more upon economic cooperation. So few countries have more intimate relations than Nepal with India, as they share an open border that allows their nationals to move freely. So we have an open border with Nepal. So their relationship is characterized by closer economic, security, and cultural ties. So India remains a major trade and transit partner where a number of Nepalis, they continue to earn a livelihood or pursue their higher education in India. But the political relationship in the near past, it has gone through more ebbs and flows, largely due to a border dispute over the Kalapani area. So this area becomes important from the perspective of map work for us. And apart from this, so there was finalization of an agreement to increase the export of power from Nepal to India to 10,000 megawatt within 10 years, development of new transmission lines, and an MOU for the construction of a petroleum supply pipeline between Siliguri and Jhabua, besides extensions to existing pipelines and construction of new terminals. These were the positives. So you need to search about what are the current or the existing pipelines between India and Nepal. Their names, they become important, names of different hydropower projects. That is also important. And so New Delhi's emphasis on expanding ties by taking a focused approach on development projects contrast well with high-sounding but less viable Chinese forays into infrastructure projects in Nepal. So even China is trying to make an entry, make its presence felt in Nepal through different infrastructure projects, but it is being said that they are less viable. So we know about how China, like when we talk about its debt policy, so that is a type of tactics which is used by China by giving huge amount of money to a particular country. That is basically it cannot be managed by that particular country in terms of repaying it periodically. So that's when it falls into the debt trap of China. And ultimately China gets more control over the politics, over the economy of that particular country. And the best example right now is the country of Sri Lanka. Coming to cyclones effect on the monsoon onset, because right now we are also having a cyclone formation in the Arabian Sea region. So global warming's effects on cyclogenesis over the Pacific and North Indian Oceans, and the warming over the North Indian Ocean and the late pre-monsoon cyclones and the typhoons are another monkey wrench in the monsoon's dynamics and in the predictions of the monsoon's onset and its evolution through the season. So here you can see this is the map of India. So winds over the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal on Thursday. So it's a map and previously reliable, but the monsoon show is now being kicked around in a game of climate change football. So why does a cyclone position matters for us when we're talking about the onset of monsoon? So some cyclones in the northern Indian Ocean, they have had both positive as well as negative impacts on the onset of the monsoon. So we cannot, clearly say one thing that whether cyclone formation is completely helpful in the onset of monsoon or it basically delays the onset. So it works both the ways. So since the circulation of winds around the cyclones, it is in anti-clockwise direction, the location of cyclone is critical as far as the cyclone's impact on the transition of the monsoon show is concerned. So basically in the northern hemisphere, the cyclones or the direction of winds is anti-clockwise. And in the southern hemisphere, it is in the clockwise direction. So, for example, if a cyclone it lies further north in the Bay of Bengal, the back winds blowing from the southwest to the northeast can pull the monsoon trough forward and assist in the monsoon's onset. So cyclones which are formed in the Bay of Bengal region, they in a way help in early onset of the, or we can say timely onset of the monsoon. So here, what is important is the location of the cyclone. So earlier this year, the Bay of Bengal had cyclone Mocha develop in the first half of May and intensify briefly into a super cyclonic storm before weakening rapidly upon landfall. So Mocha's northwest to east trajectory over the Bay of Bengal was a result of unusual anticyclones. So anticyclones are which rotate clockwise because the normal cyclones in the northern hemisphere, they move anti-clockwise. So anticyclones become opposite of cyclones, so they rotate in a clockwise manner that have been parked over the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal since March. So one severe consequence of the anomalous anticyclone since March is that both the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal have warmed by more than 1 degree Celsius in the pre-monsoon season. So the late season cyclone, the latest one, is still chugging along in the warm Arabian Sea and may well rapidly intensify. That is, have its wind speed increase by 55 km per hour within 24 hours before making a landfall. So here, 3 different cyclones have been talked about. And on the other side, a late monsoon onset does not necessarily indicates that a monsoon, we are going to have a monsoon deficit. Then again, this year is also unique with an impending El Nino. So the nation waits and watches for the arrival of the monsoon, as always, hoping for the best and preparing for the worst. So what are the requirements for limits on UPI transactions? So as transactions, they breach record highs, banks have opted to impose daily limits on UPI transactions that a person can carry out. And the idea is to sustain the smoother functioning of the payments interface as it continues to acquire wider popularity in our daily lives. So what is the conversation about the daily limits as far as UPI transactions is concerned? So at present, the users, they can make up to 20 transactions or up to rupees 1 lakh in a single day, either all at once or through the day using different number of transactions. So for certain specific categories of transactions like the capital markets or collections like for bills, then insurance, and the limit is rupees 2 lakh for these different categories. So in December 2021, the limit for the UPI-based application supported by blocked amount, that is IPO, and retail direct schemes, that was increased to rupees 5 lakh for each transaction. So right now, the conversation, it revolves around banks and the apps coming up with their own guidelines for the transactions. For example, we have the state-run lenders, Punjab National Bank and Bank of Baroda has set its transaction limit at much lower level of rupees 25,000 only. So PNB's daily limit is rupees 50,000. And for the apps, among others, like we use Google Pay users, they breach the daily limit if they try to send money more than 10 times in a single day across all the UPI apps. So it is not like we are having one uniform limit across different platforms, be it for banks or their different apps, and there are then different categories which have different amount of limits. So what does the industry think about this step of imposing a limit on UPI transactions? So digital payments app, PhonePe spokesperson, they said that the limits, they are set balancing out the customer convenience and the potential fraud or risk concerns. And the National Payments Corporation of India, it has also increased the value limit in specific categories where the average transaction value is higher, such as in case of capital markets and credit card bill payments. And as for the moves impacting the future growth, all the ecosystem participants, the NPCI and the regulator regularly, they review the transaction, the value limits on UPI and implement the requisite changes where the need exists. So basically, this would be periodically revised as per the demand. Then talking about what the most recent trends observed with respect to the UPI transaction in terms of value and volume both. So in May this year, the total number of transactions facilitated using UPI, it increased to 9,415 million number of UPI transactions were carried out. So combined value of such transactions also increased at a largely similar round rupees, almost we can say 15 lakh crores, and the segregation in terms of P2P, that is peer-to-peer and peer-to-merchant, is particularly interesting. So in terms of volume, whilst the peer-to-peer accounted for about 43% of the transactions, and in terms of value, its share scaled up to rupees 11.5 lakh crores. So this was peer-to-peer transactions. Case of peer-to-peer category, the majority of the transactions were below rupees 500 bracket. So around 54% were below rupees 500. And in case of peer-to-merchant category, the share in the same amount bracket, it stood at 84%. So this is giving us an indication of its lower down utility. So important to know that considering the varied nature of merchants and businesses, nature of transactions can be categorized in favor of one, whilst it should be on the other side. And at the same time, definitely when reliance on UPI is increasing, so UPI frauds are also increased by about 13%. And So to combat the growing incidences, there is the imperative need to have safeguard infrastructure in a growing ecosystem. So Chandrayaan-3 would be launched in mid-July, and ISRO has announced this information. So mission Chandrayaan-3 is nearing its launch, and we have already moved Chandrayaan-3 satellite from UR Rao Satellite Center in Bengaluru to Satish Dhawan Space Center in Sriharikota. So Prime Minister Modi thanks the Saudi Crown Prince for support. So thanked him for his country's excellent support during the evacuation of Indians from Sudan in April, while also conveying best wishes for the upcoming Hajj pilgrimage. And during the call, the leaders they reviewed a number of issues of bilateral cooperation and exchanged views on various multilateral and the global issues. So you need to know about whether various global issues or bilateral issues between India and Saudi Arabia, or even we can like talk about East Asia as well. So as far as this Sangol is concerned, this has been in news a lot because of the inauguration of new parliamentary building. So the head of the MUT, who comes from Tamil Nadu, says that it is not clear if it was presented to Mountbatten. It's not clear. So what was the use in giving the Sangol to Lord Mountbatten? He was after all leaving India by handing all the powers as the Adina of the Mutt, which is associated with Sangol. And apart from that, we've talked about the historical importance of Sangol. So it was like a tradition, a practice followed during the times of Cholas as a sign, as a symbol of transfer of power. So DRDO successfully tests the ballistic missile Agni Prime. So first you need to know about the basic difference between ballistic missile and cruise missile. And this was a question this year in prelims, and then important features of Agni Prime missile as well. So the new generation ballistic missile Agni Prime was successfully flight tested by DRDO of the Abu Kalam Island in Odisha, and this was the first pre-induction night launch, which was conducted by the users after 3 successful developmental trials of this missile. So Canada's wildfires shroud New York in apocalyptic haze and smog. And you can see the picture, the color, the dusky color of the atmosphere, the wind around the atmosphere. So smoke from Canadian wildfires shrouded New York in an apocalyptic smog on Wednesday as cities along the US East Coast issued air pollution warnings. So devastating fires have displaced more than 20,000 people in Canada. So El Nino arrives, raising the extreme weather fears across the world. So El Nino, it not only impacts Indian monsoon, but it has a global impact. So the US National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration said that an El Nino climate phenomenon has arrived, which can lead to new temperature records around the world. So it would all depend upon the strength of El Nino that would be witnessed. So US and UK forged the Atlantic Declaration to boost the ties. So they rededicated the special relationship to counter Russia, China, and the economic instability. So we face new challenges to international stability from authoritarian states like Russia and the People's Republic of China. Second challenge is the disruptive technologies in the form of artificial intelligence. We are like seeing growing concerns related to its usage or high dependence upon AI. Then third is non-state actors. Fourth is the transnational challenges like climate change. So these are some of the global challenges and which are obviously not specific to only US and UK. So the repo rate, basically the status quo continues. So basically that is going to aid the businesses in coming time. So that is one positive step, definitely helping the businesses to grow further. So RBI lets the banks issue the rupee prepaid forex cards to help widen the usage of such types of cards. So RBI, in a bid to broaden the scope of the rupee cards and as a part of its strategy of internationalizing issuance and acceptance of such cards, has decided to permit the banks to issue the rupee prepaid forex cards to customers and to issue such cards abroad. So rupee cards, they can be used in specific countries as well globally. So rupee debit and credit cards issued by banks in India are gaining increased acceptance abroad as well. And the same goes for even UPI transactions. They are basically available. They can be used in few specific countries. So easy trade finance is the key to $2 trillion in exports. So easy availability of affordable trade finance is the key to achieving India's $2 trillion exports target by 2030 in goods and services. So how easily you can carry out things, be it in terms of trade finance and in terms of infrastructure also, when we talk about the port infrastructure, that also plays an important role in achieving this target. So India Inc. urges for reversal of the rate cycle, but RBI, it has been like continuing with not changing the repo rate. It has not started with reducing the repo rate as of now. So RBI has paused its rate increase cycle after an aggregate 250 basis rise in the rate since May 2022. So 250 basis points in terms of percentage equals to 2.5%. So let's see what would be the decision in the upcoming MPC meetings. But as of now, things are under control. We are seeing that things are easing down as far as the inflation is concerned. So fuel demand rises by 8%. Even this is one of the signs of increasing business activities. So that is one of the factors. Coming to the newspapers, so most train accidents is due to human error and not sabotage. So rail staff equipment failures caused 164 and 15 accidents, respectively, from 2017-18 to 2021-22. So maximum you can see it's clearly visible was because of the rail staff. And 15 were because of the equipment failures. So we need to focus how we can like reduce this human error to the minimum possible level. So Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India, it has proposed a series of changes in its regulations, including an important new voting method on the bids from investors for bankrupt companies, which would allow the creditors to rank their preferences rather than merely vote in favor or against of the bids. So the creditors would now be able to rank their preferences and, not just completely tell that whether you are in favor or against of a particular bid. You basically, your options increase, and the move helps when more than one investor's proposal to bail out a distressed business is put to vote at the same time. And then it is also proposed to give more flexibility to the creditors to come up with their claims after a company is admitted into bankruptcy proceedings. So this would mean that creditors who miss the 90-day window to submit their claims need not go to tribunals to secure an exemption. So basically, it is taking steps to empower, to strengthen the investors. So petro product export value dips as the global demand in the crude oil prices cool down. So since the global demand, even that is slowing down, so the petroleum products export value is falling because the demand is also falling. And then at the same time, the one of the important raw materials is crude oil. So its prices are also cooling down. So we are seeing that it's the export value of the petroleum products is also falling. So petroleum products exports, which was a key growth driver of overall India's exports during the last financial year, registered a sharp 23% decline in April, due largely to recessionary conditions in the West that has cooled the global crude prices too, and the Commerce Ministry data shows the thing. So while easing crude oil prices have brought down India's import bill also, petroleum exports were benefiting from the imports of cheap Russian oil. So you need to know about which all things forms the maximum proportion or the maximum portion of India's export basket. So definitely here we are talking about just one thing, which is the petroleum products. So value of petroleum products exports to Netherlands, one of the India's largest export destinations, that slipped by over 43% in April. And Netherlands is a major distribution hub, helping the petroleum exports from India find their way to other European countries. And then the petroleum products exports to UAE, another transnational hub, that also declined by nearly 20%. And exports to Singapore, US, Togo, they also declined. So these are some of the major countries to which we export the petroleum products from India. And definitely we've been looking at the developments as far as the Russia's exports of crude oil to India is concerned. So Russia has emerged as the largest exporter of oil to India in the last financial year, with 50.84 million tons of crude supplies, followed by Iraq, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and US. So you need to remember this order in a proper chronology. So first is Russia, then Iraq, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and then we have US. Taking up the Financial Express newspaper. So here again, it's all about the MPC meeting. So repo rate, tightening stance, it still remains unchanged. And financial year 24's inflation forecast trimmed and GDP's retained. So RBI signals the long pause. And then RBI has also issued norms for the digital lenders. Apart from that, we've talked about that 50% rupees 2000 notes, they are back at banks, and rules for compromise settlements have also been issued. So marginally lower forecast for CPI inflation. So you can see how the forecast has changed over a period of time. And this is for the financial year 24. Then we have already have had a look at what are some of the changes that IBBI has proposed in order to strengthen the interest of the investors. So this is a move to increase chances of note to resolution plans. So the proposal would result in an elimination process and increase the chances of plans securing the 66% voting threshold. So regulators suggested a preferential voting method wherein the creditors, they can rank their preferences on bids that have been received rather than merely voting for or against one or more bids as at present. So we've seen this thing. So you need to find out more about what is invite. So here the NHAI, it aims to raise around rupees 23,000 crores via invite route this fiscal year. So fundraise through invite, you can see the highway length in terms of kilometer. This is for 2021-22, 387 kilometer, and for 2022-23, it was 246. For this year, we don't have the exact figure right now, and this is the amount of funds that has been raised. You can see for the current year, it stands at the highest level of rupees 23,000 crores. So consumer confidence is rising, inflation worries receding. Definitely, this is posing towards a very positive picture. So median inflation rate has been shown in the form of graph. You can have a look. The blue color is for 3 months ahead, and the red one is for the current figures. And consumer confidence indices, they also show that consumer confidence is rising because inflation is coming down. So that is one linkage. Coming to Indian Express newspaper, so let's take up all the important topics from this newspaper as well. So finally, monsoon has arrived in Kerala. We've talked about RBI in detail. So irrigation scheme unravels in Jharkhand, Aadhaar misused, funds have been claimed, farmers are clueless. So of the 94 beneficiaries tracked by the newspaper Indian Express, just 17 were using per drop more crop. Minister says that they'll take an action. So a robust verification process is merely just on paper. So here talking about Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana. So you need to find out more about its important features in detail. So ASI stumbles upon 13th century tomb-like structure in the city fort. So the structure was discovered during the renovation exercise. So that's how it looks. So a tomb-like structure was accidentally discovered in the city fort area while the Archaeological Survey of India was carrying out the renovation work at the city fort children's park around 3 months ago. So part of the structure remains buried and the structure will be kept intact to showcase it to the children who visit the museum and to explain them how half buried structures are discovered. So exhibition at DAG celebrates the art of 19th century Bengal. So one is there in front of us. It's an early Bengal oil painting from the exhibition. So this is the Babu and the Bazaar. So the Delhi might have been the political capital of British Empire, but in the 19th century, Kolkata was its second city, the financial hub that imbibed its way of life. So the socio-political landscape was largely influenced by its rulers, as was its art that reflected the crossroads between tradition and modernity. So centuries later, an exhibition in central Delhi now it examines the works produced during the period, how it was entwined in the history of its location. So the term Kalighat Path, which describes a school of watercolor painting, it developed in 19th century Kolkata. We are told it was incidentally given by artist Mukul De. So the showcase itself spans from mythological narratives and portrayal of deities to work that more directly and reflect on the times, including the bodybuilder person who became a source of Bengali masculine pride, and the Sundari series showing semi-nude women as an object of desire. So sustainability, where innovative development solutions help preserve the nature. So eco-friendly practices are the need of the hour in all spheres of life. Definitely, that's very true. So mobilizing the political will, resources, and collective effort to develop and deploy the sustainable solutions in various sectors takes the center stage for building a sustainable future. So definitely the role of biofuels increases, renewable energy increases, green transportation shapes the future of mobility, sustainable infrastructure, and lastly, sustainability embraces the health, safety, and prosperity for all. So these can be subheadings of an answer which talks about sustainabilities in all spheres of life. So be it mobility, the health, or fossil fuels in terms of the energy, then renewable energy, biofuels in terms of energy generation. These are all different areas where it becomes important. So sustainable packaging is one of the areas where we're talking about banning the single-use plastics, reusing, recycling, upcycling, then circular economy. All these are related terms. Again, it is talking about Manipur. So the politics of majoritarianism in Manipur was always more complicated. It was this history that had first given BJP an opening where the Congress were seen as an instrument of the valley, so much so that the Kukis called for supporting the BJP, but the current dispensation, rather than seizing the opportunity to create a new politics, has made the same mistakes. So only this time the consequences are even more tragic and irrevocable. So it is like more of political. So we're not going into the details. However, the important details, we've already discussed them before. So talking about again, RBI's MPC meeting, we've talked in detail about this as well. So RBI's fight against inflation is not over. It is not in a hurry to cut the rates. Definitely because we are keeping in mind what can be the future challenges to inflation. Basically, there are some reasons that we are waiting for some challenges which might lead to furthering inflation in future. So that's why RBI is not in a hurry to start cutting down the repo rates. So it is maintaining basically the status quo. So the RBI governor is cautious on inflation, says need to maintain Arjuna's eye on the scenario. So headline inflation is still above the target, and being within the tolerance band is not enough. So that's why maintaining an Arjuna's eye on inflation. So we'll give banks sufficient time to implement the ECL norms. So ECL, it is basically bank sufficient time for implementation. There is no need to create any panic. The comments on discussion paper on the introduction of the ECL framework. As far as rupee trade is concerned, so the process for international settlement of trade in the rupee through arrangement of the rupee wash accounts that has started. So as regards the investment in Indian securities or bonds, naturally being the first time the central banks as well as the banks on the other side, through bilateral discussions, they are seeking some further clarity on this thing. So RBI clears the default loss guarantee arrangements between the fintechs and banks, NBFCs in digital lending. So it is allowed first loss default guarantee arrangement between the regulated entities and lending service providers for digital lending. So under this system, a credit risk sharing agreement, which is a third party guarantees to compensate up to a certain percentage of default in a loan portfolio of the regulated entities, that can be banks and NBFCs. So here, the guarantee that will be provided by a third party becomes important. Coming to the explained page, what the rate hike pause means for EMIs, markets, and the investors. So it's going into the details, like you need to have the general clarity about it. So you can just, go through first few lines under each head over here. And apart from that, we have talked in detail about it. So you need to know about what is the process of naming of different cyclones. So the current cyclone, which is developing in the Arabian Sea, is named as Biparjoy and is being named by Bangladesh. So there's a proper exercise and process of naming the cyclones. Apart from this, you need to know about the important climatic conditions which is required and which leads to formation of a cyclone. So what rules are to be followed while naming the cyclone? So the proposed name, it should be neutral to politics and the political figures, religious beliefs, cultures, and gender. So the name should be chosen in such a way that it does not hurt the sentiments of any group of population over the globe. And it should not be rude and cruel in nature. It should be easy to pronounce. The maximum length should be 8 letters. So you need to remember all these conditions. And after Bangladesh, the next cyclone will be named Tej, which is based on India's suggestion. So how did Biparjoy get its name? So the name Biparjoy was suggested by Bangladesh, and the word means disaster or calamity in Bengali. So the naming of cyclone is done by countries on a rotational basis following certain guidelines. So worldwide, there are 6 regional specialized meteorological centers and 5 regional tropical cyclone warning centers, which are mandated for issuing advisories and naming of the tropical cyclones. So IMD is one of the 6 of them to provide tropical cyclone and storm surge advisories to 13 member countries under the WMO and the Economic and the Social Commission for Asia Pacific panel. So the other countries are Bangladesh, Iran, Maldives, Myanmar, Oman, Pakistan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Sri Lanka, Thailand, UAE, and Yemen. So that's there. And so the list of 169 cyclone names, it was released by IMD in 2020. It was provided by all the member countries. Like each country suggests 13 names. And then we made a make a list. So 13 suggestions from each of 13. Well, there are 13 countries. So each country would suggest 13 cyclone names and they would be combined. And then there's a complete list of 169 names of cyclones. And then according to proper chronology and sequence, these cyclones are named. So the next cyclone would be named as Tej. So the US-China thaw. Here, a Cold War style detente could be emerging between today's superpowers. Could it come to fruition or not? And what could be the consequences for India's security and the strategic objectives in the region? So we'll be just looking into this thing only. We know about what the issues between US and China. So the view from India over the last few years, US and India, they have grown closer over a shared perception of China's rise. So India's embrace of Quad and the US Indo-Pacific strategy came after the Doklam standoff in 2018 and PLA incursions into Eastern Ladakh in 2020. So US sees India as a major part of its endeavor to build a regional coalition against China. So definitely India is a very, very important player for USA to counter China. But how would an improvement in the US-China relations play out in a region where India is a country with the longest land border with China, and what options might India have? So because India definitely were closer to US as well, and we share a land border with China, so it's like a very critical area how we would be balancing between the interests between the two countries, because it could have repercussions for India. So the Cold War rivals mostly accepted each other's spheres of influence. Asked if a US-China detente might lead to a situation in which India would have to accept a China-centric regional order, so Kissinger told that the ideal position is a China so visibly strong that that will occur through the logic of the events. So India's worst nightmare in the years to come would be the emergence of a US-China G2 for the global stability, with each side indirectly accepting each other's spheres of influence. So that would be the worst nightmare for India. And then former ambassador to China, he said that India cannot let its broad spectrum strategic partnership with the US be defined primarily by China. So definitely things would not go this particular way, and differences between US and China were deep rooted and fundamental. Any attempt to accommodation can only be limited to tactical measures, putting in place guardrails and reducing the risk of military conflict, which neither side wants. So neither is interested in addressing structural problems in the relationship. So India needs a counterbalancing strategy vis-a-vis China, which will involve working with the US and others with shared concerns about the country while retaining its own agency as well. So there has to be clarity on the limitations of such strategic alignment, how far India is willing to go, and how to manage expectations on both the sides. So here we're talking about the onset of monsoon. So what does it actually means, and why a delay is not always a bad news? So what is meant by the onset of monsoon of the Kerala coast? So onset marks the beginning of 4 months, June to September, southwest monsoon season, during which India gets more than 75% of its annual rainfall. And what are these definitional conditions that determine the onset? So when we talk about the first condition, which is about rainfall, so onset is declared if at least 60% of the 14 designated meteorological stations in and around Kerala record at least 2.5 mm of rain for 2 consecutive days at any time after 10th of May. And talking about the second condition, that is wind field. So here IMD says that depth of westerlies should be up to 600 hectopascal, and where in the area which is bound by equator to 10° north latitude, from the longitude it is 55° east. So this is roughly the area from equator to Kochi and from middle Iran to about Chennai. And talking about heat, so INSAT derived outgoing long wave radiation value, which is a measure of the energy that is emitted to space by the Earth's surface, oceans, and the atmosphere, should be below 200 watt per square meter in the area between 5° north and 10° north latitude, and longitude ke liye it is 70° east to 75° east longitudes. So that's all for today. Thank you so much for joining us. We have discussed all the important details and the nitty-gritties of the topics that we took up today. And do subscribe to our channel and hit the like button.